My name is Alara, and I got to this point by meticulously building a life that my family viewed not as my own, but as a resource to be tapped. I was the silent architect of their comfort, a role I played until the day they decided to commit grand larceny in the name of love. My parents blew $43,000 on my private platinum card for my sister's trip, and when I confronted them, my mother didn't offer an excuse or an apology. She looked me dead in the eye and called me wicked. That was the moment the years of quiet resentment froze into a solid block of ice in my chest. So, I did the only thing that made sense. I froze everything. But before the freeze, there was the thaw. I had just come back from a 10-day silent retreat in the mountains, a desperate pilgrimage to find the person I was when I wasn't serving as my family's emotional and financial bedrock. For years, I had been paying the mortgage on their home after one of my father's brilliant business ideas inevitably collapsed. I was the one who funded my sister Serena's ever-changing career aspirations, from a failed jewelry line to a disastrous attempt at being a life coach. I was the quiet benefactor, the responsible one, the one whose own life was kept carefully private to prevent their needs from expanding to consume it entirely. This retreat was supposed to be a reset. I walked into my Denver apartment feeling lighter, the silence of the mountains still echoing in my soul. I had meditated on the art of setting boundaries, of saying no without the crippling guilt my mother, Marielle, was so skilled at inducing. For the first time in a long time, the quiet in my home felt like peace, not just the absence of their demands. This fragile peace lasted for the exact amount of time it took to sort through a week's worth of mail. Tucked between a Pottery Barn catalog and my utility bill was the crisp, heavy stock envelope from the private bank I used for my real money, the money I had earned and saved and invested, far from the reach of their endless emergencies. The card associated with it was for my eyes only, a last line of defense. I slit the envelope open, expecting a zero balance. Instead, a single line item made the air leave my lungs, a charge for $43,000. The payee was a luxury travel agency. The memo line read, "Maldives honeymoon package, Serena." My heart didn't start racing. It didn't pound. It simply went still. A cold, heavy certainty settled over me. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't random fraud. This was a calculated act of familial piracy. I knew, with a clarity that felt like swallowing glass, that they had found my last secret and plundered it. The carefully constructed calm from my retreat shattered, replaced by a chilling, familiar hollowness. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I picked up my keys and drove. The 20-minute drive to their house was a descent back into the very chaos I had tried to escape. I found them in the living room, a perfect portrait of familial bliss. My father, Marcus, was reading. Serena was scrolling through her phone, no doubt looking at pictures of the resort I had just unwillingly purchased. Marielle looked up, her smile a carefully painted mask. "Alara, you're back. How was it, darling? Did you find yourself?" I didn't answer. I held out the statement. The paper was perfectly still in my hand. $43,000, I said, my voice flat, devoid of the emotion churning in my gut. "On my private credit card, for a trip to the Maldives. I want to know how." The mask dropped from my mother's face. My father folded his newspaper with a loud rustle, the sound of his retreat into willful ignorance. Serena had the grace to look away, a flush of guilt rising on her cheeks. But Marielle, my mother, just sighed, a long, exasperated sound of a woman deeply inconvenienced by being held accountable. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Alara, don't be so dramatic," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "We found the card in your desk when we were looking for a spare key. Serena was just devastated about her honeymoon options, and you were off on your silent mountain, completely unreachable. We knew you'd want to help her." The lie was breathtaking in its audacity. They hadn't just stolen from me. They had done it under the guise of my own generosity. They had cast themselves as benevolent actors in a play I didn't even know I was financing. "You knew I would want to help?" I echoed, the words tasting like ash. "You went through my private desk, stole my financial information, and spent a down payment on a house, and you assumed I would be okay with it? We were going to tell you, Serena whined, finally finding her voice. We just didn't want to bother you. Bother me. The word was so absurd, so perfectly illustrative of their worldview that I almost laughed. They didn't want to bother me with the news that they were committing felony-level fraud. But it was my mother who delivered the coup de grace. She stood up, her posture radiating a righteous anger that was her signature weapon. You know, your problem, Alara, is that you're selfish. You hoard your success. You build these little walls around your life as if we're the enemy. This is for your sister, for her happiness, for you to make such an ugly scene about a bit of money. It's truly wicked. Wicked. There it was. The word that locked everything into place. For years, my independence had been painted as a betrayal. My desire for privacy was an insult. My responsible, careful planning was seen as a personal slight against their more chaotic, entitled existence. In that moment, it became irrevocably clear. I was not their daughter. I was their emergency fund, their safety net, their silent partner in a one-sided deal. And my greatest sin was that I was no longer willing to be silent. The years of hurt didn't erupt in a scream. They froze. The chaotic emotions solidified into a single, cold, hard point of resolve. I looked at my mother's furious face, my father's cowardly silence, my sister's pouting justification, and a strange calm settled over me. You're right, I said, my voice quiet, almost a whisper. It is wicked to care so much about money. I let my gaze drift around the room, taking in the comfortable furniture, the new television, the very roof over their heads. I seem to pay for all of this, don't I? It's all just money, after all. I saw a flicker of confusion, of alarm in my mother's eyes. She had been prepared for a fight, for tears, for a dramatic scene she could manipulate. She was not prepared for this chilling stillness, this quiet accounting. I turned and walked out of the house without another word, leaving them in the vacuum of my silence. The drive home was different. I was no longer running from chaos. I was driving toward order. My order. In my office, I opened my laptop. The blue light of the screen cast my face in shadow. With slow, deliberate movements, I began to dismantle the architecture of their dependency. The automatic payment for their mortgage, canceled. The family phone plan that appeared on my bill every month, terminated. The utility payments I had covered for years, stopped. I logged into the joint account I had with my mother and transferred the balance to my own. Finally, I navigated to the credit card portal. I saw my name, and below it, the 3 authorized users. With 3 precise clicks, I froze their access. Each click was a final, quiet severing. The end of an era, the beginning of mine. The flight to the Maldives was the most surreal experience of my life. I sat in business class. A glass of champagne I hadn't asked for sweating on the tray beside me, and reviewed my notes. I was flying into the heart of my family's betrayal, a paradise they had purchased with my stolen money, and I felt nothing but a cold, clear focus. There was a beautiful juxtaposition to it all, that their gaudy, hedonistic fantasy was about to become the sterile scene of my evidence gathering. When I arrived at the absurdly luxurious resort, with its overwater bungalows and unnaturally blue water, I didn't go to the beach. I went straight to the manager's office. I had scheduled the meeting under the guise of being a private financial investigator handling a high-value fraud case. The manager, a crisp man in a white linen suit, was all professional concern. He led me to a quiet, air-conditioned office that smelled of hibiscus and corporate anxiety. I laid out my case calmly, presenting the credit card information and a notarized letter from my bank authorizing the investigation. The cardholder, my client, never authorized this transaction, I said, my voice professionally detached. We have reason to believe the signature was forged by the party who stayed here under her name. The manager's expression tightened. The last thing a resort like this wanted was to be associated with fraud. He was immediately compliant. He pulled up the reservation and the folio. There it was, my name, my credit card number, and my sister Serena's contact information. He printed the registration card and the itemized receipts from the spa, the underwater restaurant, the private yacht excursion. On each slip, a looping, flamboyant signature that was unmistakably my sister's, trying and failing to imitate my own simple, blocky script. The forgery was laughably bad. I had my proof. The manager, eager to assist, made certified copies of everything. I thanked him, my hands steady as I placed the documents into my briefcase. These papers were my receipts, the final, undeniable proof of their crime. I checked out of the resort less than 3 hours after I had arrived, leaving their stolen paradise behind without a single glance at the ocean. Back in Denver, the city's familiar grid of streets felt grounding after the disorienting beauty of the tropics. My first and only stop was to Ms. Albright, my grandmother's lawyer. She was a woman who embodied the spirit of Annalise, sharp, no-nonsense, and with an unshakable belief in justice. In her quiet, wood-paneled office, I laid out the new evidence on her large mahogany desk, the certified copies of the forged signatures, the printout of the hidden trust Mr. Hayes had confirmed, the spreadsheet detailing years of my parents' financial dependence on me. She examined each document with a grim satisfaction, her glasses perched on the end of her nose. "They were arrogant," she said, her voice a low hum of disapproval. "They assumed you would continue to be their silent benefactor forever. Greed makes people sloppy." We spent the next 2 days preparing. Ms. Albright drafted the legal notices, the petitions to the probate court, the official declaration invoking the protective clause in Annalise's will. My role was simple: to prepare for the final confrontation. This wasn't going to be a messy, emotional argument. It was going to be a strategic execution, and I was going to deliver the verdict myself. The day of the reckoning, I sat in my own living room, the space I had reclaimed as my own. My heart was beating a steady, rhythmic drum, not with fear, but with a powerful, clarifying calm. It was time. I opened my laptop and initiated the video call. One by one, their faces popped onto the screen, forming a triptych of denial and defiance. My father, looking haggard and avoiding my gaze. My sister, her face set in a pout of sullen anger. And my mother, her expression a mask of cold fury, ready for a fight. They expected me to beg, to negotiate, to finally break down so they could reassert their control. I let them sit in that expectation for a few seconds, the silence stretching uncomfortably. "I assume you're calling to apologize and restore our accounts?" my mother began, her voice dripping with acid. "This little stunt of yours has gone on long enough." I didn't respond to her bait. I kept my expression neutral, my hands folded calmly on the desk in front of me. "I'm calling to present my findings," I said, my voice as even and cool as the glass of water beside me. This was not the opening they had anticipated, and it threw them off balance. "Finding number 1, I continued, holding up the first document to the camera. "A fraudulent charge of $43,000. I have here a certified copy of the hotel registration from the Maldives resort. Serena, that's your signature. Forging my name. Forgery is a felony. The hotel manager was very cooperative." Serena's face went white. My father flinched as if struck. "Finding number 2, I went on, relentless. "The matter of my grandfather's estate. I spoke with Mr. Hayes. He told me all about the trust my grandfather drafted for me. The one you told him to bury. The one you told me never existed. A trust that would have made me financially independent from you years ago." The blood drained from my mother's face. Her narrative was being systematically dismantled, and she had no defense against the facts. Her power had always been in the murky waters of emotion, guilt, and obligation. In the clear, cold light of truth, she was helpless. I let the weight of that second revelation sink in before delivering the final blow. "For years, I accepted this dynamic," I said, my voice dropping slightly, drawing them in. "I accepted my role as the family bank. I accepted the gaslighting and the manipulation. I thought it was the price of peace. But what I've learned is that you don't find peace by funding your own exploitation." I leaned forward, looking into the camera, making sure I had their undivided attention. But my favorite discovery, the one I have to thank you for, really, was the one I made after speaking to Grandmother Annalise's lawyer. I saw a flicker of genuine terror in my mother's eyes. She knew her mother-in-law's cunning. Annalise was a very smart woman, I said softly. She foresaw the possibility of this. She put a protective clause in her will, a clause that states that if any beneficiary is found to be acting in a way that financially compromises me, the wronged party, the executor, can dissolve the current distribution of all assets and reallocate them to me, in full. Their stunned silence was deafening. I could see the frantic calculations in their eyes, the dawning abject horror of what I was about to say. I didn't give them time to process it. I delivered the verdict. As of this morning, I have instructed Ms. Albright to invoke that clause. The probate court has been notified. It's over. I paused, letting the words land with the force of a physical blow. The assets you have been managing, the house you are currently sitting in, and my grandmother's coastal home in Oregon, they are all now legally mine. You are disinherited. My mother's mouth opened, but no sound came out. My father looked broken, a hollowed-out shell of a man. Serena simply stared, tears of shock welling in her eyes. This was the moment, the climax of their own making. I had presented the evidence. I had executed the consequences. Before the screaming could start, before the pleas and the curses and the pathetic, desperate attempts to claw back control could begin, I moved my cursor over to the red button on the screen. And with a quiet, final click, I ended the call, plunging them back into the silence they so feared. I was alone in my apartment staring at a blank screen, and for the first time, the silence was absolute peace. The explosion I expected never came. Instead, after I ended the call, there was only a profound digital silence. Then, the deluge. My phone screen lit up with a barrage of calls and texts, a frantic cascade of digital screaming. There were long, rambling paragraphs from my mother filled with curses, threats, and accusations of betrayal. There were pathetic, one-line pleas from my sister. How could you do this to us, Alara? And from my father, nothing. His silence was, as always, his loudest statement. I didn't read most of them. I watched the notifications pile up like snow in a blizzard, burying the family I once knew under an avalanche of their own making. I turned the phone off and placed it in a drawer. The only calls I answered were from Ms. Albright. Her voice was the calm, steady anchor in my storm. She confirmed the legal notices had been served. The process of asset transfer had begun. They will be loud, Alara, she had warned. People like them always are when their narrative is taken from them. Stay the course. Staying the course meant looking forward, not back. The house in Denver that my parents were being forced to vacate held no appeal for me. It was tainted, a monument to their deceit. But my grandmother Annalise's house on the Oregon coast, that was different. That was a place of sanctuary. I remembered summers there, searching for agates on the beach with Annalise, her laughter mixing with the sound of the crashing waves. She had taught me about the tides, about resilience, about how the ocean could wear down the hardest stone over time. The house was my true inheritance, not because of its monetary value, but because of the legacy of strength it represented. Within a week, I had movers packing up my meticulous Denver apartment. I was severing not just my financial ties, but my geographical ones, too. I was moving toward the ocean, toward the memory of my grandmother's quiet strength. The Oregon house was even more beautiful than I remembered. It smelled of salt and cedar and stood on a bluff overlooking the Pacific, a quiet sentinel against the wind. The days that followed were filled with a kind of peaceful labor. I aired out the rooms, polished my grandmother's old wooden furniture, and walked for hours on the cold, damp sand. It was a slow process of reclaiming not just a physical space, but my own mental space too. About a month into my new life, I received a call from Ms. Albright. Her voice had a note of grim finality. "Alara, I have an update," she said. "It seems the bank flagged the fraudulent charge on your card during their internal review. combined with the probate court notices about the estate. It triggered a full financial audit of your parents by the IRS. I held my breath. Their declared income for the past decade was laughably inconsistent with their spending, she continued. The mortgage, the cars, the vacations, all funded by your untaxed gifts. The authorities have frozen all their remaining personal accounts and have placed a lien on every asset they have left. They've been living in a house of cards for years, and you didn't just pull out the bottom card. You exposed the entire rotten foundation. The news didn't bring me joy. It brought a quiet, somber validation. The splintering was complete. The consequences were no longer just my private verdict, they were a matter of public record. Their carefully curated image of a successful, happy family had been irrevocably destroyed by the simple, brutal weight of the truth. The ultimate proof of their downfall arrived on my doorstep 2 weeks later. It was a misty Tuesday morning when I saw a dilapidated rental car pull up to the end of my driveway. A man got out, looking thin and lost, a ghost haunting the edge of my property. It was my father. He looked 10 years older, the confident swagger he always carried replaced by a defeated slump. He walked toward the house slowly, as if each step was a painful effort. I opened the door before he could knock. His eyes, when they met mine, were filled not with anger, but with a deep, hollow despair. This was his confession. "Alara," he began, his voice raspy. Can I talk to you for a minute?" I didn't invite him in. I simply stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind me, keeping the sanctuary of my grandmother's house pristine. "She was always like this, you know," he said, his gaze fixed on the churning gray ocean. "Your mother, so determined to have the life she thought she deserved. I went along with it. It was easier. I knew it wasn't right, taking so much from you. I knew it when she hid the trust from your grandfather. I knew it every time she used your money for something frivolous. I knew it was wrong." His voice cracked. "But I was a coward. I didn't want the fight. I didn't want her turning on me. And now, we have nothing. The IRS has taken everything. The house is gone. We're staying with your Aunt Marielle. She blames you for all of it. But I know the truth. This is my fault." He finally looked at me, his eyes pleading. "I know I have no right to ask, but we are ruined. Is there anything you can do? A little something, just to help us get back on our feet?" I listened to his entire speech without interruption. I saw the pained confession, the admission of cowardice, the flicker of hope that the old dynamic, the one where I was the eternal rescuer, might still be salvaged. The old Alara would have felt a pang of guilt, a pull of duty. But the woman standing on that porch, breathing in the cold, salty air, was different. "I hear you," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I hear that you're in pain, and I'm sorry for that. But you are right about one thing. This is your fault. Not just yours, but yours and hers. Your choices led you here." I looked at him, my expression not of anger, but of finality. "The well is dry. I cannot help you. I will not help you. The life you have now is the one you built. I am building mine." Tears streamed down his face, silent tears of a man who had finally run out of options. He had come here for one last appeal, and he had been denied. I watched him for a moment longer, a stranger who shared my DNA but not my values. "You should go, Dad," I said, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. He seemed to shrink, the last bit of fight draining out of him. He nodded, turned, and walked back to his sad little car. I stood on the porch and watched him drive away until the car was just a speck on the coastal highway. Then I went back inside and closed the door, the click of the latch a sound of absolute closure. The legal confirmation from Ms. Albright had been validating. The news from the IRS had been an affirmation. But this moment of standing firm in the face of my father's pleas, this was peace. This was the end of the war. The months that followed my father's visit were measured not in days or weeks, but in the steady rhythm of the tides. The rage and the pain that had propelled me forward had receded. leaving behind a vast, quiet shoreline. I had won. But victory felt less like a celebration and more like a deep, cleansing breath after a lifetime of holding it. I walked the beaches my grandmother had walked. I tended to the garden she had planted, and I let the house, with its scent of salt and cedar, seep into my bones. This was my space now, earned not just through legal maneuvering, but through an act of radical self-preservation. I found myself thinking of my father, not with the sharp bitterness I once had, but with a distant, clinical pity. He was a man who had chosen to drown slowly rather than rock the boat. My mother and sister were abstract figures, characters in a story that no longer involved me. The anger was gone. In its place was not forgiveness. Forgiveness felt like a gift they hadn't earned, but a peaceful, profound indifference. Their power over me had been rooted in my hope that they might one day change. By accepting that they never would, I had finally, truly set myself free. With this newfound peace came a new question: what to do with the spoils of war? The reclaimed inheritance, combined with my own savings, was a significant sum, more than I would ever need. Letting it sit in a bank, a dragon's hoard amassed from pain and betrayal, felt wrong. It felt like a monument to them, not to me. I wanted to transform it, to alchemize the ugliness of its origins into something beautiful and lasting. My thoughts kept returning to Annalise. She had given me the ultimate tool of liberation with the clause in her will. She had armed me from beyond the grave. Her legacy wasn't just the house or the money, it was the belief that a woman's strength was her own, not a resource to be plundered. I realized then what I had to do. The money was never the point, but now it could be the purpose. I called Ms. Albright, my tone no longer that of a client in crisis, but of a founder with a vision. I want to start a foundation, I told her, the words feeling more right than any I had ever spoken. In my grandmother's name, the Annalise Foundation. We spent the next several weeks bringing it to life. We drafted a mission statement, established a board, with myself and Ms. Albright as the initial members, and defined its purpose with meticulous clarity. The Annalise Foundation would not be a charity handing out pittances. It would be a launchpad. It would provide substantial educational and vocational grants to young women who found themselves in the position I had been in. The overlooked architects, the silent providers, the ones whose ambitions were dismissed and whose resources were treated as a public utility by their families. It was for the women who had been told their strength was an inconvenience, their privacy a sin, their success a thing to be siphoned off rather than celebrated. The first round of applications was a revelation. I sat at my grandmother's old writing desk, the Pacific churning outside my window, and read story after story that echoed my own. A young woman whose parents had drained her college fund to support her brother's failing business. Another whose family guilted her into working 3 jobs to support them, forcing her to put her own dreams on hold. A third whose signature had been forged on a loan application. These were my people. This was my new table. It wasn't filled with the toxic obligation of family, but with the shared resilience of strangers. With each application I approved, with each grant I signed, I felt the last vestiges of my own pain transforming into something else entirely. Purpose. I wasn't just giving away money. I was investing in the one thing my family had tried so hard to deny me, a woman's right to her own foundation. One afternoon, a letter arrived. It was on simple, inexpensive stationery, the handwriting neat and earnest. It was from the first recipient of a major grant, a young woman from Ohio who had used the funds to leave her exploitative family situation and enroll in nursing school. "I don't know if you will ever read this," she wrote, "but I had to thank you. It's not just the money. It's the knowledge that someone out there understood. It made me feel like I wasn't crazy for wanting a life of my own. You didn't just give me a grant. You gave me permission to be my own person." I folded the letter, a warmth spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with reclamation. This was the true legacy. This was the victory. It wasn't in my family's ruin, but in another woman's rise. I stood and walked to the large window overlooking the ocean. The sun was setting, painting the clouds in shades of gold and rose. My father had never called again. I heard through Ms. Albright that he and my mother were living in a small rented apartment, a shadow of their former lives. The news registered as a simple fact, like a weather report, holding no emotional charge. My victory was not their defeat. My victory was this. This house, built on a foundation of rock, this quiet, purposeful life, this ability to look out at the vast, endless ocean and feel not small, but free. I had been called wicked for wanting what was mine. I had been called selfish for building my own walls. But I see now that I wasn't building a fortress against them. I was building a lighthouse, a beacon for others who were lost in the same storm. I had built a new foundation, not on the ruins of my past, but on the strength I had finally, fully claimed as my own.